Children of the Same Water by Jessica White. Copyright 2026 by Jessica White. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means, including photocopying, recording, or other electronic or mechanical methods, without the prior written permission of the publisher except as permitted by U.S. copyright law. For permission requests, contact info@jessicawhitebooks.com. The story, all names, characters, and incidents portrayed in this production are fictitious. No identification with actual persons, living or deceased, places, buildings, and products is intended or should be inferred. My 17th year. Though the engines hadn't started yet, the men were already settling into the quiet that came with long flights and assignments overseas. The window seat provided a convenient excuse not to be drawn into idle conversation, which suited the circumstances well enough. Most of the men on board were heading out for a year or two before going home again, their absence already measured and accounted for before the aircraft had even left the ground. No such arrangement existed for me. The length of this assignment would be determined by distance and information, and by how successfully a trail that had long since gone cold could be followed back to its source. Records were incomplete, reports often contradictory, and the taken seemingly scattered across a region large enough to swallow its secrets forever. If God were merciful, the search would be brief and the outcome straightforward, but British intelligence suggested otherwise, and they'd proved the more reliable authority in such matters. Whatever the outcome, the work would continue until it was finished. I simply couldn't return home with empty hands, even if it meant never returning at all. The lieutenant across the aisle had been watching me for the better part of 10 minutes with all the subtlety of a man who'd never learned any. He was older than me by at least 10 years, which troubled him more than it should have. "How does a boy barely out of the nursery end up wearing a captain's crown?" he asked me. It wasn't the first time the question had been asked of me that day, and likely would not be the last. Men like him tended to concern themselves with age when they had little else to stand on. I am commissioned under His Majesty's authority to recover the taken children. If there are any concerns regarding my rank or age, Buckingham Palace may address them for you. That put an end to the questions, as it usually did. And as the aeroplane began to move, I put him from my mind and returned to my own thoughts. 3 years earlier, when I was 14, I believed my life would follow a fairly predictable course. That assumption did not survive the day. The library was quiet in the way only school libraries ever were, full of boys pretending to work and masters pretending not to notice the difference. My books were arranged across the table in the order I intended to complete them. Latin translation finished. French exercises done, mathematics remained, which I saved for last because it required the most care, and anything bearing my name must be done to perfection. Calculus should have held my full concentration, but I found the numbers difficult to follow. My thoughts kept straying to Grace, and though I thought of her often enough on any ordinary day, that evening I seemed unable to think of anything else. I was still staring at the page in front of me when I heard my name called across the room and looked up to find the porter standing in the doorway. "Mr. Ashcombe," he said as he beckoned me over. "The headmaster would like to see you at once." Being called out during study hours was unusual enough to attract attention, though most of the boys were polite enough to pretend otherwise. I shut my books and gathered my things, trying to think of any reason the headmaster might call for me, but nothing came to mind, which made the summons difficult to account for. But I followed without asking questions. Besides, if something were to be known, I would know it soon enough. The headmaster's door was already open when I reached his hall, but before I stepped closer, I caught the familiar scent of the rosemary and starch soap used for the laundry at home. There was no reason for it to be there, because Father didn't come to the school without reason, and he certainly didn't come in the middle of term. For a moment, I remained frozen where I was, trying to think what could have happened that would bring him there in person, and finding I didn't like any of the possibilities that presented themselves. I understood whatever waited inside the room was going to divide my life into a before and an after, and I found I wasn't in any particular hurry to hear it. But time would not protect me from the truth, so I knocked once on the open door and waited. "You wanted to see me, headmaster?" The headmaster gave me a look I couldn't identify, but would come to recognize many times in the following years. It was the slight crease in his brow and the way he avoided my eyes that told me he knew something I didn't, and he was relieved he didn't have to be the one to tell me. He was already moving away from his desk to give us privacy. "Yes, Mr. Ashcombe. Come in. I will leave you with your father." I entered the room as the headmaster stepped past me and the door closed behind him, leaving the two of us alone. My father was standing by the table rather than sitting, which alerted me that something was terribly wrong. He cleared his throat and motioned towards the desk opposite him. "Put your things down, Christian. I need to speak with you." He looked much as he always had, though there was more weight on him than I remembered. It was the sort I suppose came with land and responsibility rather than service, and a touch of grey sat at his temples that had not been there the last time I saw him, as though it had come on for this moment alone. My father blinked toward the floor, sighing before he looked towards me again. "The details are still coming in from intelligence. However, it appears George and Margaret Rowen have been executed." After that, I felt nothing at all. Not grief, not anger, nothing. It was as though everything inside me had come to a sudden stop. It is also being reported that Grace has been abducted, and I swear to you that is all I know. I remember thinking I might not be alive anymore either, because I saw the room and my father standing in front of me, but I couldn't feel myself standing at all. It was as though the connection between thought and movement failed entirely, and when my legs gave way beneath me, it didn't feel like falling so much as watching someone else forget how to stand. The chair caught me before I was aware I reached for it, and I found myself sitting with no clear memory of deciding to do so. It hadn't even been 4 months since we were together at my brother's wedding, standing in the gardens behind the house with her cheeks pink from the champagne we had no business drinking. She'd pulled rank on me, as she often did, and informed me that as the granddaughter of an earl, she was entitled to steal liquor if she wished, and that as the son of a viscount, it was my duty to assist her. Then I kissed her for the first time, or I suppose it was more honest to say she kissed me. I still tasted the sweetness on her mouth and saw the way she smiled at me afterward, as though she'd accomplished something she'd been planning for quite some time. Some things faded over the years, but that moment between the two of us never would. My father was not a man who bent easily, and in all my life I had never seen him lower himself for anyone. But I was his youngest son, and he'd always been a little less severe with me than with the others. He knelt in front of me and reached for my hand, and I understood he was not untouched by what had just been said, and that he felt the pain of it with me. "The Earl will need us now, so go to your room and gather what you need," he said. "This is when families are tested, and this is when House Ashcombe proves why we are called the stewards of Blackmere. Do you understand me?" I heard what he said, but I couldn't yet understand how the world would continue if Grace were no longer in it. Everything I had ever been told about my future included her, and without her, I couldn't see what any of it was meant to be anymore. My father watched me for a moment. Then something in him settled back into place as he understood I couldn't be reached yet. "Go on," he said. And so I stood and left, because he expected me to, and because I had been raised to understand that when given an order, one obeyed it. I don't remember walking back across the school, only that I was suddenly in my room with the door closed behind me and my case already in my hand. I set it on the bed and opened it, then went to the dresser and pulled open the drawers. On top of the folded shirts in the drawer was the last letter she wrote me, and the moment I saw it, my thoughts began to line up again. She told me about the trip, about the cities they'd been sent to, and the people her father had been meeting. If she'd been taken, then those names and places might prove important now. Perhaps there was something in the letter that would help me understand where she'd been taken, or where someone might think to move her afterward. So I folded it carefully and put it into the inside pocket of my jacket. Under the letter was a photograph of Grace and me on the church steps, with her leaning against my shoulder and my arm around her as I kissed her forehead. I only stood, looking at her face and trying to understand how a person could be in the world one day and gone from it the next. Then I closed my eyes and pressed the photograph to my lips. "I love you," I whispered. "Just stay alive, and I will find you." The door opened behind me, and Cyril came in, closing the door quickly behind him, his fair curls already too long for school standards and in clear need of cutting, though his family had the sort of money where no one ever seemed inclined to press the matter where he was concerned. "Ashcombe," he said, "I heard the headmaster called for you. What happened?" I put the photograph into my pocket as well and took a few shirts from the drawer before closing it again. "Grace was abducted and her parents murdered," I said. "So I am going to Blackmere to lend my support." He stared at me for a moment, as though waiting for me to correct what I'd just said. Then he took a step closer when I didn't. "Good God, Christian," he said, "I am so sorry." I opened the cupboard and took a few pairs of trousers from the hangers. "Thank you," I said. Thanks, I thought. Was that the correct thing to say when someone told you they were sorry for the murder of two people you loved and the abduction of a third? It seemed ridiculous under the circumstances, but I couldn't think of anything else, so I said nothing more and folded the trousers before putting them into the case. I closed the case and moved to go past him, but Cyril stopped me and pulled me into a hug before I reached the door. "You know how to reach me," he said. "If you need anything, telephone me, and if I can do something, you are to tell me straight away." He let me go, and I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand as he went ahead of me to open the door. "I will do that," I said. "Thank you." I walked out into the corridor, thinking I had stepped into someone else's life by mistake when I left the library earlier. I was certain that when we reached Blackmere, everything would be explained and put right again, and that this would be some kind of terrible misunderstanding. By that hour, most of the men were asleep, and the aircraft settled into the long, dull stretch of hours where there was nothing to do but sit and think. I checked my watch and worked out the time for where Grace was last known to be, and knew it would be near enough to her time for bed to begin. I'd worn a dozen of the photographs thin over those 3 years. Replacements came with me for the journey in an envelope in my bag, which I'd eventually wear out as well. It had become my habit to kiss her goodnight, and I meant to continue until I could do it properly. So I touched my lips to her face. "I am on my way now, my darling. Know it and sleep well," I whispered and leaned back into the seat, looking at her as the aircraft carried me towards the colonies.